In a quiet home filled with worry, two German Shepherd puppies step in and change everything. What begins as simple companionship soon reveals something extraordinary, an unspoken bond that reaches deeper than medicine ever could. Each bark, each gentle nudge seems to spark a response no one thought possible. As hope collides with disbelief, one family finds themselves standing at the edge of a miracle. But how far can love and loyalty carry them? And what happens when the world begins to watch? The December wind rattled against the thin window panes of the small Parker home like a restless hand tapping at the glass, the cold seeping through the cracks of old wood and worn insulation. The air carried a sharp bite that made every breath feel heavier, a reminder that winter did not forgive, and that warmth inside the house was something to be fiercely protected. Yet despite the hum of the old heater, the living room felt weighted by something colder than the weather outside. It was the silence between two exhausted parents who had been fighting a losing battle for 6 months. Emily Parker sat hunched over the crib in the corner, her thin fingers gripping the railing until her knuckles whitened. The dim glow of a nightlight washed her face in shadows, emphasizing the hollows beneath her eyes and the weary droop of her shoulders. She had not slept properly in months, maybe longer, but she no longer kept track. What was the point of marking days when each one bled into the next, carrying the same exhaustion, the same helplessness? Inside the crib, her son Liam whimpered softly, a small sound that made Emily's chest clench. His tiny hands twitched, fingers curling as though searching for something to hold on to. But from his waist down, there was nothing. No movement, no response. 6 months old and already confined by the diagnosis that had crushed every dream Emily had once painted in her mind. Spinal Muscular Atrophy. 3 words delivered in a sterile office by a doctor with tired eyes. Words that had become a sentence of stillness. Liam would never crawl, never chase a ball through the grass, never run laughing into her arms. His life, they said, would be fragile and short. Emily brushed her hand across his soft cheek, whispering soothing words that carried more desperation than calm. She tried not to cry, but the sting was always there, waiting. She could not fall apart in front of him, not here, not now. But every night she felt the cracks widening. She wanted to believe she was strong enough, yet her body betrayed her. Her back ached from sleepless nights, her mind screamed at the injustice, and her heart beat with a constant rhythm of fear. Behind her, David shifted in the worn recliner. His hair, once neatly kept, had grown unkempt. The shadow of a beard clung to his jawline, and his shirt carried the wrinkles of days spent slumped in that chair. He rubbed his face, the sound of rough palms against skin, breaking the heavy silence. "You should sleep," he murmured, his voice heavy, each word soaked with fatigue. Emily gave a humorless laugh, one that sounded brittle even to her own ears, and missed the chance to hear him cry. "No thanks." Her tone was sharp defensive, though underneath lay only the throb of fear. David sighed. They had danced this dance before his urging her to rest her refusal. She was terrified that if she closed her eyes, if she let herself drift into even a moment's oblivion, something would happen. Liam's seizures might return, his breath might falter, and she would not be there. The thought was unbearable. I just don't know how much longer you can do this," David said softly. His words were laced with helplessness, his eyes lingering on her thin frame, the way she swayed slightly as though her body could collapse under the weight of exhaustion at any second. "I'll do it as long as I have to," Emily snapped, but her voice broke halfway through. She hated herself for the way the words came out sharp and cutting when all she wanted was for someone to take away the ache in her chest. She wanted to blame him, but she couldn't. He was just as trapped in this as she was just as powerless. David flinched, his jaw tightening as he turned his gaze toward the dark window. His silence carried its own pain. They were both drowning, 2 people reaching for each other in the storm, but never quite managing to grasp the other's hand. Emily leaned over the crib again, pressing her lips to Liam's forehead. His breathing was shallow, uneven, and she felt the helpless fury rise in her again. She had begged the doctors for answers, for hope, but they had offered none. Their clinical words, palliative care, supportive therapy, felt like daggers. She wanted to scream at them that her son was more than a case, more than a number on a chart. He was hers. The room was suffocating in its heaviness, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest, making it hard to breathe. And then, breaking through the darkness, came a sound so unexpected, it startled Emily out of her despair, a sharp, high-pitched bark. Emily blinked, turning her head toward the doorway. Standing there, a little awkward and clumsy, were two German Shepherd puppies. Their paws were too large for their bodies, their ears not yet fully standing tall, giving them an almost comical appearance. One pup, with a steady gaze and a certain stillness about him, stepped forward, first his coat, a rich amber mixed with dark sable along his back. The other tumbled after him, tripping slightly on the edge of the rug before letting out another bark, this one playful and insistent. Emily's lips parted in surprise. She hadn't heard them come in. David must have forgotten to close the door after his brother's visit earlier that day. The puppies had been gifts, if one could call them that, from the local shelter animals that no one else wanted because they were too small, too uncertain, too full of restless energy. Emily hadn't known what to do when they first arrived. She had been overwhelmed, barely able to handle Liam, much less two rambunctious pups. Yet something in her heart had whispered that, maybe, just maybe, they were meant to be here. The calmer one padded forward and sat near the crib, his amber eyes fixed on Liam with a surprising intensity for a creature so young. He tilted his head, ears twitching, as though trying to understand the tiny whimpers coming from the baby. The other pup leapt onto the couch with a clumsy scramble, his tongue lolling as he looked between Emily and the crib. "Great," David muttered, rubbing his temples. "Just what we need, 2 more mouths to feed." Emily ignored him. She couldn't take her eyes off the pups. There was something different in the air, a subtle shift she hadn't felt in months. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but it was hope, faint and fragile, yet undeniable. She reached down and scooped up the calmer one, pressing his warm fur against her face. He smelled of hay and innocence, the kind of scent that belonged to something unbroken, something untouched by sorrow. The pup didn't struggle. He simply nestled into her arms, steady and quiet, like he understood. "Ranger," she whispered suddenly, the name rising to her lips without thought. Yes, that was his name, strong, watchful, protective. The other pup barked again, scrambling closer, clearly unwilling to be left out. He nudged Emily's leg insistently, his bright eyes wide with curiosity and affection. She laughed softly despite herself, a sound she hadn't heard from her own lips in too long. "And you," she said, bending down to rub his head, "you'll be Scout." It fit him perfectly, restless, eager, loyal. David sighed, leaning back in the recliner. "Emily, they're just dogs. They can't fix this." But Emily didn't answer. For the first time in months, she felt something stir inside her chest. Something that wasn't despair. As she lowered Ranger back to the ground, both puppies moved toward the crib. Ranger stood guard at the side, his amber eyes locked on Liam, while Scout placed his front paws gently against the wooden railing and peered inside, tail wagging. Liam whimpered a soft, restless sound. Emily tensed, ready to soothe him, but then Scout let out a low, gentle whine. To her astonishment, Liam quieted. His tiny fists unclenched and his breathing eased just slightly, as though the presence of the puppies soothed him in a way no lullaby ever could. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand over her mouth, afraid to break the fragile moment. David looked over, his brows furrowing. He wanted to say something, maybe another reminder, not to get her hopes up, but the words stuck in his throat. Even he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The night wore on, but the heaviness had shifted. For the first time, Emily felt that maybe the walls of despair surrounding their home were not impenetrable. Maybe light could seep through the cracks. Ranger lay curled at the base of the crib, his ears twitching at every sound, his little body tense, with an instinctive protectiveness that seemed far beyond his age. Scout remained at Liam's side, his head resting against the crib rail as though keeping vigil. Emily sat back, exhaustion still pulling at her. But her heart ached in a different way now. She knew the road ahead was uncertain and that the doctor's words still hung over them like a storm cloud. But as she watched her son sleep more peacefully than he had in weeks, flanked by two unlikely guardians, she felt a small flame of something she hadn't allowed herself in too long. She leaned her head against the couch, whispering softly into the stillness, "Maybe you two are here for a reason." And as the snow fell quietly outside, covering the world in a blanket of white, the Parker home, though still fragile and uncertain, no longer felt entirely drowned in despair. For in the presence of Ranger and Scout, the night carried with it the faint promise that miracles, however impossible, might still find their way in. The following evening descended like a heavy curtain, the cold pressing in against the windows, as though winter itself sought to break into the fragile sanctuary of the Parker household. Emily moved quietly through the living room, her motions careful and deliberate, almost ritualistic, checking the heater, adjusting the nightlight, arranging the thin blanket around Liam in his crib. Every small action was an effort to protect him, to guard him from the unrelenting chill of both the season and his condition. Liam whimpered, his tiny body restless, his face creased with discomfort that no lullaby could erase. Emily's heart ached with the sound. She leaned close, whispering soft comforts, brushing her fingers along his cheek. But the unease in her son's breathing would not ease. Beside her, David sat slouched in the recliner, eyes shadowed by fatigue and skepticism. He watched in silence, the unspoken weight between them, heavier than words could bear. On the floor, Ranger and Scout stirred from their nap. The puppies had settled into their new home with surprising ease, their presence already reshaping the energy of the house. Ranger, the steadier of the two, rose first, stretching his legs before padding toward the crib with a calm determination. Scout, ever eager to follow, bounced after him with a clumsy enthusiasm, his tail wagging as if he carried a secret joy he needed to share. Emily watched as Ranger, with more confidence than a puppy should have gathered himself, and leapt onto the small bed that had been pushed next to the crib. His paws landed softly, and he inched forward, his nose twitching as he inspected the fragile child before him. Scout, unwilling to be left behind, scrambled awkwardly, climbing over the side with a grunt of effort before wriggling his way closer to Liam. Ranger, Emily whispered, half a warning, half a prayer. She reached out instinctively, ready to pull him back, but paused. The sight stopped her. Ranger had lowered his body beside Liam with a surprising gentleness, his dark eyes fixed on the baby's face, his breathing slow and steady, as if offering the rhythm of calm itself. Beside him, Scout nestled directly against Liam's side, pressing his small body into the curve of the child's still form. His warmth radiated outward, and Liam for once did not resist it. His clenched fists loosened slightly, his brow smoothed, and a soft sigh slipped from his lips. Emily's breath caught. She froze, hands trembling against the railing of the crib. For 6 months, peace had been a stranger in this house. Every night had been broken by cries of pain, restless fits, and desperate prayers whispered into the dark. But now her son lay quiet. His body softened against the mattress, his eyelids fluttering shut. Sleep, real sleep, claimed him. Her eyes blurred with tears, hot and unstoppable. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. David noticed the sudden stillness and leaned forward, his brows furrowed. "What is it?" he asked cautiously. Emily pointed, her voice trembling with awe. "Look at him." David's eyes followed her gesture to the crib. His expression flickered confusion, then disbelief, and finally something like recognition. He leaned back, shaking his head, unwilling to surrender to the hope that pressed insistently at his chest. "It's just a coincidence," he muttered. Babies get tired eventually. But Emily could not look away. She had memorized every twitch of Liam's discomfort, every restless whimper that had marked their nights. She knew this was different. This was not exhaustion dragging him into a fitful slumber. This was peace, fragile but unmistakable, held together by the warmth of two unlikely companions. Ranger lay like a sentinel, his body curved protectively, while Scout pressed so close that Liam's small hand rested against his fur as if by instinct. Minutes stretched into an hour, then another. The clock's red digits blinked in the dim light. 45. 11:30 past midnight. Still Liam slept, his breathing, even his body free of the tense spasms that had haunted his rest. Emily refused to move, afraid that any motion would shatter the miracle before her. She sat cross-legged beside the crib, her eyes fixed on her son, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that he was finally calm, fear that it would end as suddenly as it had begun. David shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. He had been watching too, though he tried to mask it behind weary sighs and muttered skepticism. "Dogs can't fix this," he said again, softer this time, almost as though he was trying to convince himself. "They're just keeping him warm." Maybe Emily whispered, though her voice carried none of his doubt. "But look at him, David. Look at our son. He's at peace." Her words broke on a sob she could not contain. She wiped at her cheeks, furiously, embarrassed by the intensity of her emotion, but she couldn't stop. The sight before her was more than comfort. It was a glimpse of something she had thought lost forever: hope. Scout stirred in his sleep, letting out a soft whimper before nuzzling closer to Liam. The baby shifted slightly, his tiny arm brushing against the pup's fur. The contact was faint, almost imperceptible, but Emily saw it. She leaned forward, her breath catching, eyes widening. "David," she whispered sharply. "Did you see that?" David sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing. "See what?" His hand, Emily said, her voice trembling. It moved. David frowned, shaking his head. "Emily, babies twitch in their sleep all the time." "It doesn't mean..." But before he could finish, Scout shifted again, pressing his nose lightly against Liam's tiny fingers. This time, the reaction was undeniable. Liam's hand, limp for so long, curled faintly, his fingers closing as if in response to the puppy's touch. It was small, fragile, but it was deliberate. His hand moved. Emily gasped, her heart slamming against her ribs. She reached for David's arm, gripping it tightly. He did it again. "Don't tell me that's coincidence." He felt him. He responded. David's mouth opened, then closed again. His skepticism faltered under the weight of what he had seen. His rational mind screamed for explanations, reflex, spasm, chance. But his heart told him something else entirely. He pressed his hands over his face, exhaling slowly, torn between the safety of disbelief and the dangerous spark of hope. Emily leaned over the crib, tears streaming freely now. She brushed her fingers across Liam's cheek, whispering softly, "You're still there, baby? You're still fighting?" Ranger lifted his head at her voice, his amber eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her shiver. It was almost as if he understood, as if he too knew that something extraordinary had just taken place. Scout gave a soft bark, startling in the silence, then settled back against Liam with a content sigh. The baby's hand twitched once more, this time lingering longer, his tiny fingers gripping a strand of fur. Emily choked back another sob, overwhelmed by the miracle unfolding before her eyes. David finally lowered his hands, his expression conflicted. He wanted to dismiss it, to cling to the certainty of science and the grim predictions they had been given. Yet the evidence was undeniable. He had seen it. His son's hand, still for 6 months, had moved in response to a touch. And that touch had come not from medicine or machines, but from 2 small puppies whose presence had changed everything. It could still be nothing. He said weakly, his voice lacking conviction. Emily turned to him, her eyes blazing with determination through her tears. Or it could be everything. The words hung between them, charged with the weight of possibility. Neither spoke again. They simply watched their hearts tethered to the fragile rhythm of a baby's breath and the gentle movements of two German shepherd pups, who had somehow pierced through the darkness of despair. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. But inside the Parker home, a new silence took hold. It was no longer suffocating, no longer heavy with hopelessness. It was the silence of awe, of fragile belief taking root. For in that small moment, as Scout's nose brushed against Liam's fingers and Ranger stood sentinel by the crib, the impossible had stirred. And as Liam's hand twitched once more, curling with purpose, Emily knew, with a certainty that burned through her exhaustion, this was the first moment of something greater. This was the beginning of a miracle. The morning light bled pale through the curtains, a dull gray, that did little to warm the Parker living room. Emily had been awake since before dawn, her head resting against the edge of the crib, listening to the quiet rise and fall of Liam's breath. It was steadier than usual, as if the boy had carried some of the peace from last night into this new day. For once, she let herself believe he might be resting, not merely exhausted, but resting. At her feet, Ranger stirred. The German shepherd pup stretched with deliberate care, each motion almost solemn, before climbing to his usual place beside the crib. He was always the first to move, the first to check on Liam, as though the baby's safety had been assigned to him alone. Scout followed, clumsier and eager, his tail sweeping against the couch as he bounded forward. Emily smiled faintly. They were so different, and yet in perfect step with each other. She could not shake the strange thought that they had come into the house carrying some secret purpose, something larger than themselves. Ranger lifted one paw and rested it carefully on the edge of the crib. His eyes tracked Liam's small hand limp against the blanket. Slowly, almost experimentally, he lowered the paw and let one claw brush the back of Liam's skin, light, intentional, more like a guide than a scratch. Then he pulled back, paused, and did it again, this time tapping softly, as if setting a rhythm. Emily leaned closer, breath held. "What are you doing?" she whispered to the pup, though her question was really to the universe. Liam's fingers twitched. Not a spasm, not the random jerks she had seen 1,000 times before, but a reaction as if the paw's touch had drawn something out of him. Her pulse thudded in her throat. Scout, not to be left behind, slipped onto the mattress with his usual clumsy determination. He pressed his nose to Liam's palm and gave it the gentlest lick, the wet warmth startling against fragile skin. Liam's response was unmistakable. His tiny hand curled inward slowly, shakily, but deliberately. His fingers brushed the fur at Scout's muzzle, then tightened ever so slightly, as though trying to hold on. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The tears came before she could stop them, spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. For 6 months, she had prayed, begged, pleaded for any sign that her son's body still remembered how to move. And now, here it was. Not imagined, not a dream. Real. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice breaking. "David, he's moving." From the recliner, David had been half watching, half drifting in the haze of another sleepless night. But the urgency in Emily's voice cut through him. He stood quickly, mug forgotten on the side table, and leaned over the crib. His eyes narrowed, his breath caught. He saw it. He couldn't deny it. Liam's hand, clumsy and weak, was gripping Scout's fur. It could be reflex, he said, his tone uncertain. He needed the words, needed the shield of logic. Reflexes were safe, explainable. Hope was not. Hope could break you. Emily turned on him, tears still streaking her face. "No," she said fiercely, almost daring him to argue. This isn't random. He felt him. He responded. David opened his mouth to reply, but stopped. Scout had licked again, soft and patient, and Liam's hand had curled in answer. Then Ranger, watching intently, tapped once more near Liam's wrist like a conductor signaling the next beat. And God help him. Liam's fingers twitched to the rhythm. David exhaled sharply and dragged a hand across his face. He wanted to doubt. He needed to doubt. But there it was, right in front of him, his son answering, however faintly, to the urging of two puppies. Emily was crying openly now. Not the silent tears of despair, but the raw, unrestrained sobs of a mother witnessing the impossible. She bent close, whispering through her tears, "You're still in there, baby. You're still fighting." Ranger's head lifted at her voice, amber eyes steady and knowing. It was absurd, impossible, yet she swore he understood. Scout, delighted with his small victory, wriggled closer and pressed his body to Liam's side tail, wagging gently. The boy's hand rested against his fur fingers, twitching now and then as if trying to remember how to hold. David sank into the chair, running both hands over his face. He was pale, trembling, caught between disbelief and wonder. I don't know what to think," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "I've seen every test, every scan. They said he couldn't, he wouldn't. But he did," Emily said firmly, her voice cutting through his doubt like steel. She turned back to the crib, brushing her fingers across Liam's cheek. He did. For several minutes they simply watched. Ranger repeated his motions, tracing the air near Liam's arm, occasionally patting lightly against skin. Each time Liam twitched in response. Sometimes small, sometimes barely noticeable, but real. Scout stayed close, offering warmth and gentle licks, and Liam's hand curled again and again, weak but deliberate, as though seeking connection. It was like a dance, awkward but miraculous. A rhythm the three of them shared, as if the puppies were teaching Liam a language his body had forgotten. Emily pressed her forehead to the crib's edge, tears sliding freely. This is the first time, she whispered, almost reverent. The first time he's ever moved, because he wanted to. David swallowed hard, his throat tight. He couldn't answer. He couldn't bring himself to crush that fragile flame in Emily's voice. Because deep down, he wasn't sure he wanted to anymore. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. Eventually, Liam drifted back into sleep, his fingers loosening from Scout's fur. But Emily's heart kept racing, her mind replaying the sight over and over. She knew she would never forget it. The first time her son reached outward, not trapped in stillness, but part of the world again. David broke the silence, his voice low. "If we tell anyone, they won't believe us." Emily turned to him, eyes red but fierce. "Then we'll show them. We'll prove it." He hesitated. "You mean a camera?" she said quickly, as though afraid he might stop her if she paused. "We'll record it. Every touch, every movement. No one can dismiss it if they see it." David rubbed the back of his neck. "Or they'll say it's coincidence, gratuitousness, or editing, or—" "I don't care," Emily cut in. "We'll have proof for ourselves. We'll know. And if it happens again, when it happens again, we'll have something no one can take away." Her determination silenced him. He recognized that tone, the one she had used when she vowed she wouldn't leave Liam's side through the endless nights when she refused to accept the doctor's timelines. It wasn't stubbornness. It was survival. Finally, he nodded. "All right. Tonight, we'll set it up." Emily exhaled shakily, relief flooding her. She reached into the crib, brushing a hand against both puppies' heads. "Good boys," she whispered, her voice thick. "You're saving him. You're saving us." That evening, the plan took shape. David rummaged through drawers for an old tripod they had once used for family photos. Emily cleared a space on the bookshelf, adjusting the angle until the lens captured the crib in full. The red recording light blinked faintly in the dim room, a silent witness to what might unfold. As they prepared, Emily felt a quiet strength settle into her bones. For the first time since the diagnosis, she didn't feel powerless. Something was happening, something beyond charts and scans and prognosis. Something alive, undeniable. And she would make sure the world saw it, even if the world wasn't ready to believe. She glanced at Liam, already stirring, Scout curled at his side, Ranger watching intently. The pups seemed to know what was coming. Their eyes gleamed in the half-light, steady and sure, as though they had been waiting for this moment all along. Emily reached for David's hand. He hesitated, then squeezed back. No words passed between them, but the look they shared carried a fragile, unspoken truth. Whatever this was, however far it went, they would face it together. And as Ranger lifted his paw again, and Scout pressed his nose to Liam's palm, the camera blinked silently, capturing the first flickers of a miracle. The Parker living room had taken on the hush of a waiting chamber, as if the walls themselves held their breath. The small tripod was balanced on the bookshelf, its camera eye glowing with a red dot, quietly watching. Emily and David sat close together on the couch, neither willing to break the fragile silence. On the other side of the room, the crib glowed softly under the amber nightlight. Ranger and Scout paced restlessly, their nails clicking against the floorboards, aware that something was about to begin. It was well past midnight. The house and the world beyond had gone still. Snow drifted in lazy swirls outside the window, muffling the town in a blanket of white. Inside, though, Emily's heart pounded. She could hear it in her ears, could feel the pulse in her fingertips as she gripped the blanket draped across her lap. Tonight would matter. Tonight they would see if the previous miracle had been an accident or something more. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the crib. He'd argued earlier, quietly but firmly, that they shouldn't put too much faith in the night before. Babies twitched. Reflexes tricked hopeful eyes. But here he was, just as taut with anticipation, as Emily staring at their son, as if the crib might reveal an answer no doctor had ever given. Ranger was the first to step forward. The steadier of the two, he always seemed to know when to lead. He hopped lightly onto the low mattress placed beside the crib and pressed his nose against Liam's arm. It wasn't a nudge or a playful bump, but a deliberate press, gentle enough not to startle, firm enough to be felt. He held it for a beat, then pulled back, watching with eyes so intent they looked almost human. Scout, waiting his turn, released a low, plaintive whine. It was not the anxious yelp of a young dog, but a sound measured and soft, vibrating in the still air like a question. His ears flicked forward, and he whined again, holding the note just long enough for Liam to stir. Emily gasped when it happened. Liam's tiny fingers twitched in answer. A slight curl, then a release, then another twitch, as if his body were trying to remember the sequence. She pressed her knuckles against her lips, afraid to make a sound that might shatter the moment. Ranger nudged again, this time at Liam's wrist. In response, Liam's toes shifted beneath the blanket. A small flex, barely more than a ripple of muscle. But it was movement where no movement had been. Scout's whine rose softly again, coaxing, and Liam's hand trembled in reply, the smallest of communications, but real. The camera's red light blinked on, steady and unflinching, capturing every second. David inhaled sharply, leaning closer. "Emily," he whispered, but his voice faltered. There was no need to finish the sentence. They both saw it. Liam was responding. Emily's tears fell silently, one after another. She had lived 6 months waiting for signs that never came. And now, under the glow of the nightlight, with 2 small pups orchestrating a rhythm, her son's body was speaking. Weakly, shakily, but undeniably. Scout let out another soft sound, a hum that rose and fell like a lullaby, and Liam's hand curled toward the source. His fingers brushed the puppy's muzzle, then tightened with effort. Emily let out a quiet sob, unable to contain it. David rubbed both hands across his face as if to ground himself. He wanted to call it reflex. He wanted to label it coincidence. But he couldn't. Not anymore. The pattern was there. The touches and sounds came with intent, and Liam answered with intent. It's not possible, he murmured, voice cracking. But it's happening. Emily nodded, unable to look away. It is. Don't you see they're reaching him? They're waking something inside him. For the next half hour, Ranger and Scout worked as if they had rehearsed. Ranger pressed his nose, then pawed to specific points along Liam's arm and hand, waiting between each for response. Scout punctuated the intervals with his soft whines, sometimes adding a lick to Liam's fingers. The baby responded, each time sometimes with a curl of his fist, other times with a twitch of his foot under the blanket once, with the faintest flex of his ankle. The more they repeated, the clearer it became. This was not random. The pups had found a rhythm, and Liam's body was learning to echo it. Emily turned her head toward David, her face wet with tears, her eyes shining. Do you still think it's coincidence? David didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on Liam, his breath shallow. Finally, he shook his head slowly. No. He admitted the word, weighted with awe and fear in equal measure. No, I can't. Not after this. Relief and triumph surged in Emily's chest. She reached out, grabbing his hand, squeezing it with trembling fingers. Then we have to keep going. We have to show people, the doctors, everyone. If this is real, we can't let it be ignored. David swallowed, still staring at the crib. We'll need more proof. More than a single night, but... His voice broke slightly. Emily, if this is real, it changes everything. She nodded fiercely. It does. Ranger shifted his weight and tapped his paw gently against Liam's knuckles like the tap of a teacher encouraging a student. Liam responded with a jerk of his fingers, sharper this time, as though strength was growing in the repetition. Scout let out a delighted bark, quick, high, and almost playful. Emily laughed through her tears, pressing a hand over her mouth to stifle the sound. David sat back stunned, and for the first time in months, a smile cracked across his face. It was tentative, almost shy, but it was there. The room seemed lighter for it, as though the darkness that had pressed so heavily against their walls for months had lifted, even just a little. Hours passed. The camera rolled on, silent and impartial, recording each miraculous exchange. Emily lost track of time. She could have watched forever her son finding motion where none had been guided by two small shepherds whose patience outlasted even hers. At last, exhaustion settled over the house. Liam's movements grew slower, more erratic, until he drifted into sleep. Ranger curled at the foot of the crib, Scout nestled close to Liam's side. The nightlight glowed, casting them all in amber. Emily leaned back, her body shaking from the release of so much emotion. She wiped her face, her cheeks raw from tears. David sat beside her, silent, still processing. She turned toward him, voice soft but steady. If this is a miracle, she whispered, we have to prove it. The words hung in the still air, both a vow and a challenge. The camera's red light blinked once more, recording the silence that followed, a silence no longer heavy with despair, but alive with possibility. The hospital corridors always smelled the same sterile and sharp a mixture of antiseptic and faint rubber that clung to the walls like a permanent stain. For Emily, that smell had become the scent of despair. Each time she inhaled it, her stomach turned, remembering the countless visits that had stripped away her hope piece by piece. This morning, however, her heart beat with a reckless determination. She carried a small flash drive in her coat pocket, gripping it so tightly her knuckles whitened. Inside were the hours of footage she and David had captured Liam responding to touch, to sound, to the dog's patient rhythm. Proof. David walked beside her, his jaw tense, eyes fixed ahead. He hadn't spoken much since they left the house, but Emily felt his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He was bracing himself, she realized, for the fight he expected to come. The elevator doors slid open, spilling them into the neurology wing. The hallway was quiet, only the occasional echo of footsteps. Emily's chest tightened as they approached the familiar office door. Dr. Hammond, Pediatric Neurology. The brass letters gleamed dully under fluorescent lights. Emily hesitated, her hand hovering near the handle. "Ready?" she asked softly. David gave a tight nod. "Let's show him." Dr. Jonathan Hammond was a man of order and rules. His office reflected that bookshelves lined with neatly labeled binders, framed diplomas in precise alignment, a desk free of clutter. He rose when they entered, his white coat crisp, his expression the same blend of weary patience and clinical detachment Emily remembered from Liam's diagnosis. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker," he greeted, gesturing toward the chairs. "How is Liam holding up?" Emily sat quickly, unable to hide the spark in her voice. "Better. We think better. We have something to show you." Hammond raised an eyebrow, settling back in his chair. "Go on." David plugged the flash drive into the doctor's computer, pulling up the file. "We recorded this 2 nights ago. You'll want to see for yourself." The video flickered to life on the monitor, the dim glow of their living room, Liam in his crib, Ranger and Scout moving with deliberate intent. Hammond leaned forward, steepling his fingers, his expression unreadable. On screen, Ranger tapped lightly at Liam's wrist. A pause. Then Liam's toes shifted under the blanket. Scout whined softly, and Liam's hand curled toward him, brushing fur with tiny fingers. The sequence repeated again and again, dog prompting, baby responding. Emily watched the doctor's face instead of the screen. Her heart pounded as she searched for any flicker of recognition, any sign that he saw what she saw. Her nails dug into her palms. Minutes passed. The footage rolled on, Liam twitching, curling, flexing in weak but undeniable rhythm. Emily's throat tightened with tears. It was all there, captured clearly. Surely now someone in authority would finally believe. At last, Hammond leaned back, folding his hands on the desk. He exhaled slowly. "I see what you're pointing to," he said evenly. Emily leaned forward, eyes shining. "So you agree? He's moving because of them. He's responding." Hammond's lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand why it looks compelling. But what I see are spontaneous reflexes. Infants with SMA type I can display occasional involuntary movements, especially when stimulated externally. Touch, sound, even temperature changes. What you're interpreting as deliberate is, I'm afraid, coincidence." The words landed like a knife. Emily blinked, stunned, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "Coincidence?" Her voice cracked. That was not random. He curled his hand around Scout's paw. He moved his foot after Ranger touched him. "You saw it. I saw muscle spasms." Hammond replied calmly, almost gently. "Predictable responses to stimuli. They're not purposeful actions. It's important not to mistake reflex for progress." Emily's breath hitched, the tears coming fast now. She shook her head, desperate. "No. No, you're wrong. I know my son. I know what I saw." David's voice broke in, sharp with anger. "Doctor, we've lived with this day after day. We know the difference between twitching in his sleep and responding to something. This was real." Hammond met his gaze with steady patience. "I don't doubt your sincerity, Mr. Parker. But as a physician, I have to rely on clinical evidence. Anecdotal videos while touching don't change the underlying condition. Liam's prognosis remains the same." David's fists clenched against his knees. He wanted to shout to demand the doctor admit what was in front of him. But Hammond's calm detachment left no room for argument. Logic was his shield, and emotion would not penetrate it. Emily couldn't speak. Her tears blurred the office into shapes and colors. She wanted to scream, to shake him, to force him to see. But all she could do was sit there, breaking silently while the doctor dismantled her hope. After a long pause, Hammond softened his tone. "I know this is difficult. It's natural to look for signs, to cling to moments that feel extraordinary. But it's important you focus your energy on comfort care, on cherishing the time you have. I worry that false expectations will only deepen your grief." Emily's stomach twisted. False expectations. As though what she had witnessed with her own eyes was an illusion, a trick of desperate love. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, forcing herself not to scream in his office. David rose abruptly, his chair scraping hard against the tile. "Thank you for your time, Doctor," he said, his voice tight, every word, straining against the anger beneath. Hammond nodded, already returning his gaze to the paperwork on his desk. "I'll see Liam at his next scheduled appointment." Emily stumbled to her feet, blinking through tears as David guided her out. The door clicked softly behind them, sealing the conversation like a tomb. The hallway blurred. Emily walked in silence, every step echoing in her skull. She clutched her coat tightly around herself, though the building was warm. It felt as though the hospital had turned to ice, the fluorescent lights mocking her with their sterile brightness. When they reached the parking lot, David stopped, turning to her. His face was flushed, jaw set hard. "They'll never believe it," he said bitterly. "Not unless it's written in a textbook. Not unless it fits into their neat little boxes." Emily shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. "But it's real. I saw it. You saw it." "I know," David admitted, his voice rough. "But to them it'll always be reflex. Coincidence, noise." Emily sank against the car, pressing her hands to her face. The tears came harder, racking her chest. She had walked into the hospital with hope burning like a fragile flame, and now it felt as though Hammond had doused it in cold water. David wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. He didn't speak, just held her while she cried. For a long moment they stood together in the cold, their breath misting in the air, their hearts heavy with disappointment. Later, as they drove home, the silence stretched between them. The snow blurred past the windshield headlights, carving narrow tunnels of light through the dark. Emily stared out at the white fields rolling by her reflection, pale in the glass. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "If they won't believe us, then we'll do it ourselves." David glanced at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we'll keep recording," she said, turning toward him. There was fire in her eyes now, burning through the grief. "Every night, every movement. We'll document it until there's no denying it. If science says no, then we'll show them until they can't ignore us." David hesitated, then nodded slowly. He could see the determination in her, fierce and unyielding. "All right," he said finally. "We'll prove it." Emily leaned back in her seat, her hands folded protectively over her lap. The pain of Hammond's dismissal still throbbed, but beneath it something stronger had taken root. Resolve. She whispered into the quiet car, more to herself than to David. "If this is a miracle, we have to prove it." The road stretched before them, uncertain and snow-covered, but Emily's gaze was steady. Whatever waited ahead, she would not turn back. Emily stared at the upload bar, inching across her laptop screen. Her palms were slick, her heart thumping as though she'd just leapt into cold water. The cursor blinked in rhythm with her pulse, video successfully uploaded. She leaned back in the chair, exhaling shakily. It was a gamble. She and David had argued late into the night about whether to share the recording. David had worried about privacy, about judgment, about the wolves of the internet that feasted on other people's pain. But Emily had been insistent. "We can't let them dismiss us," she'd whispered fiercely. "If the doctors won't listen, maybe the world will." So she had trimmed the footage, leaving out their whispered commentary, focusing only on Liam, Ranger, and Scout. 7 minutes of raw, unedited truth. She had titled it simply, "When Hope Comes on 4 Paws." At first, nothing happened. The video collected a handful of views, friends, neighbors, the cousin who always liked her posts. A few comments trickled in. "So sweet, beautiful dogs, praying for your little boy." Emily refreshed the page obsessively. Her stomach knotted with equal parts hope and dread. By the second evening, something shifted. A local parenting group had shared it, and from there, it began to ripple outward. The views ticked past 1,000, then 10,000. By the end of the week, the number had climbed into 6 figures. Emily's phone buzzed endlessly with notifications, likes, comments, shares. David watched in disbelief as the counter rolled upward. "This is insane," he muttered, staring at the screen. "Why is everyone suddenly paying attention?" Emily's eyes never left the comments flooding in. "Because it's real," she whispered. "Because people see it." The response came in waves. Some viewers were moved to tears. "This is a miracle. Proof that love breaks every barrier. Your little boy is blessed. These animals are angels in disguise. I showed this to my whole family and we're praying for Liam tonight." Others were more skeptical, their words sharp. "Looks fake." The parents are moving the baby's hand off screen. "Those are random reflexes." "Stop exploiting a sick child for attention." "Where's the medical proof? Until then, this is just another internet hoax." Emily felt each comment like a stone thrown at her heart. The praise lifted her, the cruelty cut her down, and the sheer volume left her dizzy. Their quiet home had become the center of a storm. Then, the media noticed. A local news station reached out, asking for an interview. A national morning show emailed the next day. Headlines appeared online: "Baby with rare disease moves with help of Puppies miracle or trick." The viral video, dividing the internet. Neighbors stopped Emily in the grocery store to ask questions, some with genuine warmth, others with thinly veiled curiosity. Strangers drove by their house to snap pictures. For a family that had lived in isolation, wrapped in grief, the sudden spotlight was overwhelming. David grew tense, protective. He unplugged the landline after reporters began calling at midnight. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said, pacing the kitchen. "They're turning us into a circus." Emily felt torn. Part of her was terrified too, but another part clung to the flood of support. For every cruel comment, there were dozens of people writing from across the world, sharing their own struggles, sending prayers, sending money. People were seeing Liam. People were believing, even if the experts would not. "It matters," she said quietly one night as she tucked Liam into his crib. "Even if it's messy, even if it hurts sometimes, it matters that people know he's here." The video crossed 1 million views within 2 weeks. By then, their lives were unrecognizable. Emily woke to hundreds of messages, parents of children with SMA begging for advice, strangers offering to send toys, believers declaring that Liam was proof of divine intervention. David grew more withdrawn, exhausted by the attention. "They don't know us," he said. "They don't know him. They're projecting their own stories onto ours." But Emily found herself reading every message late into the night, eyes aching, heartbreaking, and mending all at once. She saw herself in the desperation of other mothers. She clung to the kindness, let it strengthen her against the cruelty. Still, doubt gnawed at her. What if the skeptics were right? What if they were fooling themselves? But then she would look at the footage again. Ranger's gentle tap, Scout's coaxing whine, Liam's trembling response. And she knew. Whatever the world said, she knew. It was during one of those late-night reading marathons that the email appeared. The subject line was plain, "Regarding your video." Emily almost deleted it, expecting spam. but the sender's name gave her pause. Dr. Margaret Hayes. She blinked, her pulse quickening. She knew that name. Anyone who had ever researched animal-assisted therapy knew it. Hayes was a pioneer, the woman who had built programs pairing therapy dogs with veterans, children with autism, even patients in palliative care. Her studies were cited around the world. Emily opened the message with shaking hands. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Parker, my name is Dr. Margaret Hayes. I am a clinical researcher specializing in animal-assisted intervention. I recently came across the video of your son Liam interacting with your dogs Ranger and Scout. I have watched it many times. I want you to know I believe what I see. There are patterns in your recording that cannot be dismissed as mere reflex. The synchrony between the dog's actions and Liam's responses is remarkable. If you're open to it, I would very much like to visit and observe Liam directly. I believe there is potential here not only for your family, but for the field of therapy itself. Please let me know if you would consider this. I would be honored to meet your family. Sincerely, Dr. Margaret Hayes. Emily covered her mouth with both hands, tears filling her eyes. She read the email twice, 3 times, just to make sure she hadn't imagined it. Someone believed. Not just someone, the someone. She woke David, shaking his shoulder until he groaned in protest. Read this, she whispered urgently, thrusting the laptop into his hands. David rubbed his eyes and squinted at the screen. As he read, his expression shifted confusion, disbelief, then something softer, almost like hope. She wants to come here, he asked slowly. Yes. Emily breathed, her voice trembling. She believes us. David leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, his defenses seemed to drop. If she's willing to put her name on this, he murmured, then maybe we're not crazy after all. Emily laughed through her tears, the sound breaking and joyous all at once. She gathered Liam into her arms, pressing her cheek against his tiny head. Did you hear that, baby? Someone believes in you. Ranger lifted his head from the foot of the bed, ears perked as if he too understood. Scout wriggled closer, pressing against Emily's legs. For a moment, the room felt like the center of the universe. One small family, 2 faithful pups, and a message that might change everything. The next morning, Emily drafted a reply, her fingers trembling on the keys. Dear Dr. Hayes, thank you for reaching out. We would be honored to have you visit. Please tell us when and how. We want the world to see what Liam and the dogs are doing. We want to prove it's real. When she pressed send, she felt the same electric charge as when she had uploaded the video. Except this time, the gamble wasn't for the internet. It was for science, for legitimacy, for the future. As she closed the laptop, Emily whispered to David, her voice steady, despite the whirlwind around them. This is the beginning. And for the first time, David didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes steady, his hand covering hers. Together, they waited for the answer that could turn their fragile miracle into something undeniable. The Parker house had never been so clean. Emily had spent the entire morning scrubbing every surface, fluffing pillows, even rearranging the toys Liam rarely touched. She knew Dr. Hayes wasn't coming to evaluate her housekeeping, but anxiety had its own logic. If this visit was as important as she felt, it was everything had to look prepared, intentional, worthy. David had laughed gently when she tried to iron the living room curtains. Emily, she's here to see Liam, not the drapes. Still, he didn't stop her. He understood. By the time evening fell, the air itself seemed taut with anticipation. Ranger and Scout picked up on it, pacing the house with restless energy. Scout barked at every passing car, while Ranger kept sitting by the front door, ears perked as though he knew a guest was coming who mattered. At precisely 7 o'clock, headlights swept across the snowy driveway. Emily's breath caught as a dark sedan pulled up. Out stepped a woman in her late 50s, tall and composed her silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore no white coat, only a wool jacket and scarf. But she carried herself with the gravity of someone who had lived her life inside the halls of science. Dr. Margaret Hayes. Emily opened the door before Hayes could knock. "Dr. Hayes, welcome. Please come in," Emily said, her voice trembling with nerves. Hayes smiled warmly, though her eyes were sharp and observant. "Thank you for having me. And please, just Margaret tonight. I'm here as a guest." She stepped inside, shaking the snow from her boots. Her gaze swept the room, not judging, but attentive. She moved with the quiet assurance of someone used to walking into unfamiliar homes, meeting families on the edge of despair and carrying the weight of their hopes. David joined them, shaking her hand firmly. "We're grateful you came," he said. After watching that video, Hayes replied, "I couldn't not come." Ranger padded forward first, sniffing politely before sitting squarely at her feet. Scout followed, tail wagging furiously, nudging Hayes's hand, until she laughed and scratched behind his ears. "Well," she murmured, "they're even more striking in person." Emily felt her chest loosen a fraction. At least the dogs had passed the introduction. They gathered in the living room, dimly lit by the amber glow of the nightlight and a single lamp. Liam lay in his crib, eyes heavy with sleep, his small body dwarfed by the blankets. Emily hovered close, protective, while David adjusted the camera on the bookshelf, recording again for their own records and perhaps for Hayes's research. Hayes pulled out a small notebook and pen. "I'd like to observe quietly first, if that's all right," she said. "No interruptions. Just let them do what they naturally do." Emily nodded, her heart hammering. She looked down at Ranger and Scout. "Go on," she whispered, as if they understood. They did. Ranger took his usual place beside the crib, resting his paws on the mattress edge. His movements were steady, purposeful. He leaned down, nose brushing gently against Liam's wrist, then tapped once with his paw, precise and delicate. Liam stirred, eyelids fluttering. A faint twitch ran through his fingers, then another. Scout moved in next, pressing close and releasing a low, drawn-out whine that resonated in the quiet room. Liam's hand curled toward the sound, brushing Scout's muzzle fingers, weak but deliberate. Emily swallowed a sob. It didn't matter how many times she'd seen it, each time felt like the first. She glanced quickly at Hayes, afraid the woman might dismiss it, as Hammond had. But Hayes was leaning forward, eyes wide, pen forgotten above her notebook. Her mouth had fallen slightly open, her professional mask cracked by raw astonishment. The dogs continued their rhythm, almost like a dance they had perfected in private rehearsals. Ranger's nose tapped lightly along Liam's forearm, tracing invisible lines. Scout punctuated the intervals with soft whines, sometimes licking Liam's fingers to coax a grip. Liam responded each time, fingers curling, foot twitching beneath the blanket once, even a faint flex of his ankle that made Emily clutch David's arm in disbelief. Hayes whispered under her breath, "Extraordinary. Truly extraordinary." Emily's eyes filled. For months she had been waiting for someone with authority to see. Now, finally, someone did. After nearly 20 minutes of steady observation, Hayes sat back, exhaling deeply. She looked from Liam to the dogs, to the Parkers, her expression a mixture of wonder and gravity. "I have to be honest with you," she said quietly. "In all my years of research, I've never witnessed anything like this." Emily pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. David leaned forward. "So it's not reflex, not coincidence?" Hayes shook her head slowly. "Reflexes are irregular, uncoordinated. What I just saw was pattern. The dogs initiate Ranger with tactile cues, Scout with auditory. And Liam responds with consistency. Weak, yes, but consistent. This is purposeful interaction, not random spasms." Emily let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "Thank God. Finally." Hayes lifted her pen again, but her hand trembled faintly. My working theory is that Ranger and Scout have somehow attuned themselves to Liam's residual neural signals. Even in severe SMA, there can be traces of motor neuron activity that don't reach clinical thresholds. Humans might miss them, but dogs perceive subtleties beyond our capacity. They're detecting those signals and amplifying them through repeated cues. David frowned, though his eyes gleamed with hope. You mean they're finding what's left of his nervous system? Yes, Hayes said firmly, and not just finding it, training it. Think of it like tapping into an old telegraph line. The signal is faint, almost lost. But if you listen carefully enough, you can still hear the clicks. These dogs are listening. More than that, they're coaxing Liam to send stronger signals back. Emily pressed both hands to her heart. Her body trembled with a mixture of joy and disbelief. So, it's real. They're really helping him. Hayes's gaze softened. It's real, and it could be groundbreaking. For the next hour, Hayes watched intently, scribbling notes, occasionally murmuring in awe. She tracked the intervals between Ranger's taps and Liam's responses, the timing of Scout's whines, and the corresponding hand curls. At one point, Ranger tapped near Liam's ankle, and Hayes nearly dropped her pen when the baby's foot gave a small but clear twitch. She leaned back, shaking her head in wonder. I've worked with therapy dogs for decades, seen them calm veterans with PTSD help autistic children speak their first words. But this... She gestured toward the crib, her voice thick. This is different. This is a dialogue at the level of the nervous system itself. David sat stunned, struggling to absorb her words. Emily couldn't stop smiling through her tears. It felt like breathing after months underwater. Hayes closed her notebook. Her eyes were bright now, the composure of the seasoned scientist cracking into visible excitement. If this can be documented, studied carefully, it could open entirely new avenues in neuroregenerative therapy. We've always assumed animals could comfort, motivate. But this suggests they might actively facilitate neural recovery. Emily whispered, almost reverently. You mean treatment? Hayes nodded slowly. Possibly. A form of rehabilitative therapy we've never considered. If Liam can strengthen these pathways, if the dogs continue this work systematically, we might see functional improvement. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. David broke it first, his voice hoarse. So what do we do? Hayes looked between them, her expression firm but kind. Keep recording. Every session, every interaction. I want data, timestamps, repetitions, outcomes. I'll guide you through protocols, but the work has to happen here with Ranger and Scout. They're the therapists now. Emily let out a shaky laugh, wiping her cheeks. Therapists on 4 paws. Hayes smiled faintly. Sometimes the best healers don't wear white coats. Later that night, after Hayes had left for her hotel, the Parkers sat together in the quiet living room. Ranger and Scout were curled up against Liam's crib, their steady breathing filling the silence. Emily reached for David's hand. She saw it. She believed. David squeezed back, his voice thick with emotion, and she gave it a name. Emily rested her head against his shoulder, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For the first time since Liam's diagnosis, she felt not just hope, but direction. As the snow fell softly outside, she whispered into the darkness, "If this is the beginning of something new, we'll follow it wherever it leads." Ranger stirred, lifting his head as though he'd heard her promise. Scout whined softly in his sleep, and Liam's tiny hand, resting open on the blanket, twitched once steady, deliberate, alive. The hospital felt different this time. Emily noticed it. As soon as they stepped through the glass doors, the fluorescent light seemed less harsh, the echo of footsteps less oppressive. Maybe nothing had changed in the building itself, but in her chest, something had shifted. She was walking in not as a mother begging for scraps of hope, but as someone carrying proof. Not just shaky belief or desperate prayer proof. Dr. Hayes walked beside them, her stride brisk and confident. She carried her binder pressed close to her side, a weight of authority that Emily clung to silently. David pushed Liam's stroller, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the halls as if daring someone to dismiss them again. This was not the same family that had been brushed aside by Dr. Hammond weeks before. Tonight, they had an ally. Inside the neurology wing, the same brass letters waited on the familiar door, Dr. Jonathan Hammond, Pediatric Neurology. Emily's pulse quickened, but Hayes didn't hesitate. She knocked firmly once and opened the door before waiting for an answer. Hammond looked up startled to see not only the Parkers, but Hayes as well. His eyes widened slightly, recognition sparking. "Dr. Hayes," he said, rising quickly, "I wasn't aware you were joining us." "Consider this a consultation," Hayes replied smoothly, extending her hand. "I've been reviewing some unusual material involving the Parker child. I think it warrants your attention." Hammond shook her hand, his demeanor respectful but cautious. "Very well. Let's take a look." What followed was unlike any appointment Emily had ever endured. Hayes led the conversation, presenting her observations, citing her credentials, even pulling up the Parkers' recorded videos on her tablet. She described the repeated patterned responses, the coordinated cues from Ranger and Scout. She used words Hammond couldn't easily dismiss: consistency, reproducibility, neurological dialogue. Then came the turning point. Hayes insisted on new diagnostic tests: electromyography, nerve conduction, studies, imaging. Hammond hesitated, but with Hayes's insistence, he ordered them. Emily watched from the waiting room, Liam cradled against her chest as nurses wheeled in equipment. The hours stretched endlessly, each test another mountain of anxiety. She clutched Ranger's leash in one hand and Scout's in the other, the dogs pressing close as if anchoring her to the floor. David sat beside her, his knee bouncing uncontrollably. "If this doesn't show anything," he muttered, not finishing the thought. Emily silenced him with a look. "It will," she said, though her own heart trembled. At last, Hammond called them into his office. Hayes was already there, leaning forward over a stack of printouts. Her expression was calm, but her eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. Hammond adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. "The results are surprising." He glanced at Hayes, then back at the Parkers. "Contrary to our earlier assessments, there appears to be residual nerve activity, very faint but measurable." Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled instantly. She clutched Liam closer, her voice breaking. Ranger and Scout were right from the start. David exhaled hard, dragging his hands over his face. Relief and vindication warred with the anger of months wasted in dismissal. Hammond continued carefully. "It's not enough to predict full motor recovery, but it is significant. And it does align with Dr. Hayes' observations." Hayes straightened her tone, decisive. "Which means this child is not beyond intervention. His case makes him an excellent candidate for experimental therapy." Emily's breath caught. "Therapy? You mean there's something you can do?" Hayes nodded. "There's a regenerative trial being conducted right now. It combines neural stem cell infusion with intensive rehabilitative training. Early results have shown promise, especially when paired with non-traditional stimulus, like what Liam is already receiving from the dogs." The room fell silent as Emily and David absorbed the words. A chance. For the first time, someone wasn't talking about comfort care or making memories. Someone was offering a way forward. David leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "What's the cost? What do we have to do?" Hayes hesitated, her eyes softening. "That's the challenge. The trial is not fully covered by insurance. The out-of-pocket expense is substantial. How much? Emily asked, her throat tight. Hayes exhaled. $250,000. The number slammed into the room like a physical weight. Emily's vision swam. David sat back heavily, his face pale. That's impossible, he muttered. We don't have anywhere near Emily clutched Liam tighter, shaking her head. There has to be a way. There has to. Hayes's voice was gentle but firm. I know it's daunting, but I've seen families raise these amounts before with the right community support. And your story already has visibility. People care. They just need a way to help. The ride home was thick with silence. Snow fell again, muffling the world outside. But inside the car, Emily's thoughts screamed. $250,000? It was an impossible number, the kind that crushed families into surrender. But she couldn't surrender, not now. Not when the door was finally cracked open. David gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. We can't do it, he said finally, his voice ragged. We can't raise that kind of money. Not in time. Emily turned toward him, her face wet with tears, but her eyes blazing. We don't have a choice. Liam has a chance. We can't let it die because of money. He shook his head, anger rising. You think strangers are going to hand us $250,000? We're drowning in bills as it is. Strangers have already watched Emily shot back. Millions of them. They saw. They believed or they doubted. Either way, they paid attention. If even a fraction of them helped, David's hands tightened on the wheel. He wanted to argue, to demand she face the cruel reality. But deep down, he knew she was right. If the internet had carried their story this far, maybe it could carry them further still. That night, Emily sat at the kitchen table long after David had gone to bed. The glow of the laptop lit her tired face. She drafted the words slowly, carefully pouring her heart into each sentence. Our son Liam has spinal muscular atrophy. Doctors told us he would never move, never respond. But two puppies, Ranger and Scout, refused to believe it. They reached him when no one else could. They helped us discover that Liam still has nerve activity. Something science said wasn't there. Now Liam has been offered a chance, a clinical trial that could change his life. But the cost is overwhelming, $250,000. We cannot do it alone. We need you. She attached photos. Liam nestled between the dogs, his tiny hand curled around Scout's fur. She uploaded clips of the video Hayes had witnessed, each one showing Liam's small, miraculous responses. Then she set up the campaign on a fundraising platform, her cursor hovering over the final button. With a trembling breath, she clicked publish. The response was immediate, like striking a match in dry grass. Within hours, donations trickled in $25 from a neighbor, $100 from a stranger across the state. Comments poured onto the page. We believe in Liam. Keep fighting. This is for your miracle boy. I can't give much, but I hope it helps. By morning, the campaign had passed $10,000. Emily stared at the screen, an awe hand pressed to her mouth. She woke David with the news, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself a smile. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story hit national headlines. Two puppies help baby defy rare disease. A late-night talk show ran a segment. A celebrity retweeted the campaign link with the caption, "Let's get Liam walking." Donations surged. Tens of thousands, then over 100,000. The counter climbed faster than Emily dared believe possible. Of course, not everyone supported them. Critics resurfaced, claiming it was exploitation, questioning the legitimacy of the therapy, accusing the Parkers of scamming. David raged at the comments, ready to shut it all down. But Emily reminded him of the faces, the names, the real families sending love and dollars. They're louder, she said softly. but they're fewer. Look at the numbers. Look at how many people believe. And she was right. For every cruel word, there were 10 messages of hope. A teacher's class had pooled allowance money. A church in another state held a fundraiser. A veterans group sent a letter describing how therapy dogs had saved their lives, along with a check. The momentum built like a tidal wave. One evening, just 2 weeks after launching, Emily refreshed the page and saw the total crest $250,000. She gasped so loudly that David rushed into the room thinking something was wrong. "It's there," she whispered, her hands shaking. "We did it. It's all there." David stared at the screen, his mouth falling open. Slowly, the tension drained from his shoulders, replaced by a stunned laugh. He pulled Emily into his arms, holding her tightly as she sobbed against his chest. Ranger barked, Scout yipped as if celebrating too. Liam stirred in his crib, opening his eyes just long enough to curl his hand faintly against the blanket. The impossible had happened. A week later, the Parkers sat once more in Dr. Hammond's office. Except this time they were not beggars, but pioneers. Hayes explained the trial enrollment process, the travel arrangements, the timeline. Hammond, though still cautious, could no longer deny the evidence. As Emily signed the paperwork, her hand trembled, but not with fear. With awe, with gratitude. With the weight of knowing that every stranger's dollar, every believer's prayer, every bark from Ranger and whine from Scout had opened this door. She glanced at Liam, then at the 2 pups sprawled faithfully at his feet. "You did this," she whispered through tears. "You started it. And now we'll finish it." The door had opened, and beyond it waited not certainty, not guarantee, but something infinitely precious, a chance. The Parker house had never felt so small. Every morning when Emily opened her laptop, the world seemed to pour directly into their living room. Comments, donations, messages, news alerts. The quiet house on the snowy street was suddenly at the center of something vast and uncontrollable. It began with a single headline from a major newspaper: 2 puppies, 1 baby, and the miracle that defied science. Within hours, the article was translated into multiple languages. By evening, Emily's inbox was full of journalists asking for interviews. The video she had uploaded weeks ago, once a quiet plea for recognition, was now being broadcast on television stations in countries she had only read about. David watched the numbers climb on the fundraising page like a man staring at a rocket launch, the digits rolling upward faster and faster until they blurred. "This is unreal," he muttered. "It's like the whole world suddenly decided to knock on our door." Emily, eyes wet with disbelief, whispered, "Maybe that's what it takes for a miracle to keep living. Everyone carrying a piece of it." The support came in waves, each one larger than the last. At first it was individuals, neighbors, distant relatives, strangers who had stumbled across the video. They left comments filled with prayers, encouragement, tiny donations scraped from tight budgets. Emily read every note aloud to David at night. "This woman says she lost her daughter to SMA 3 years ago. She says Liam gives her hope she thought was gone." Or, "This family sent $20 and wrote that it's all they can afford, but they believe in him." Then came the communities. A middle school in Ohio held a bake sale for Liam. A church in Texas passed a collection plate dedicated solely to his treatment. A veterans group in California, moved by the therapy dog's role, sent a check along with a letter describing how service animals had saved them from despair. David opened the mail one afternoon and found a package filled with handmade cards. Each one was from a child with crayon drawings of puppies and babies and bright rainbows. He pressed the stack to his chest, overcome before carrying it into Liam's room. "This is for you, buddy," he whispered, placing the cards on the dresser. Liam stirred in his crib as if he could feel the love radiating from every page. Then the celebrities took notice. A country singer tweeted the video with the caption, "Proof angels sometimes have paws." A famous actor recorded a short video urging fans to donate, his voice breaking as he described watching Liam curl his tiny hand around Scout's muzzle. A professional football team announced they would match every dollar raised in the next 24 hours. The fundraising page exploded. Emily refreshed the screen again and again, her hands trembling as the total leapt by thousands at a time. "Look," she gasped, pointing to the counter. "We're at 180,000. David rubbed both hands over his face, laughing in disbelief. "I don't even know how to process this. Yesterday we didn't know if we'd ever make it. Now look at it fly." The media frenzy intensified. Television crews set up outside the house. News vans idled along the curb, their antennas reaching skyward like metalled trees. Emily hated the intrusion, but she understood it too. People wanted to see with their own eyes the boy whose story had broken through cynicism and fatigue. During one interview, a reporter asked Emily what she thought when skeptics accused her of staging everything. Emily held Liam in her arms, Ranger and Scout nestled at her feet. She looked straight into the camera, tears bright in her eyes. "Believe what you want about us," she said softly, "but don't tell me my son isn't real. Don't tell me these dogs haven't given him something science said was gone. You can argue about miracles. I live with one." The clip aired that night and spread across social media like wildfire. Hashtags trended worldwide, #Liam's, Miracle, #Ranger and Scout, Hope with Paws. The Parkers' campaign page passed its goal faster than anyone had predicted. Emily had imagined weeks or months of scraping, begging, worrying. Instead, within days of the celebrity endorsements and media coverage, the total surged past 250,000. And it didn't stop. The counter kept climbing: $270,000, $300,000, $350,000. People weren't just giving, they were rushing to be part of the story. One night, Emily sat at the kitchen table staring at the glowing number on the screen. Tears blurred her vision until the digits swam. She whispered, "It's there, and more. We have everything we need." David came up behind her, his arms circling her shoulders. He buried his face in her hair, his voice choked. "We did it. Emily, we actually did it." But Emily shook her head through her sobs. "Not just us. Everyone. They carried us here. They clung to each other, shaking with the weight of it all." Later that evening, they gathered in the living room as if for a family ceremony. Emily held Liam, his head nestled against her chest. David sat beside her, one arm around her back. Ranger and Scout lay sprawled at their feet, as though sensing the gravity of the moment. Emily whispered to her son, "You have a chance now. A real one. Because the world believed in you." Liam's tiny hand twitched against her skin, curling briefly into a fist. Emily laughed through her tears, kissing the top of his head. David reached down to scratch Ranger's ears, his voice breaking. "You two started this. You saw him when no one else would. And look what you've done." Scout wagged his tail, letting out a soft whine, and Emily swore it sounded like joy. The next morning, Hayes called. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "I've never seen such a response. You've done more than raise money. You've ignited something bigger. People are talking about animal-assisted therapy in a new way. Scientists, charities, parents, this could change everything." Emily listened, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Hayes' voice softened. "Now the real work begins. Liam will need to be enrolled in the trial, prepared for travel, monitored carefully. But none of that matters without what you've already built. You gave him the chance. Now we'll fight to make the most of it." In the days that followed, the Parkers' home filled with letters, gifts, and blessings from around the globe. Packages arrived from Japan, South America, Europe. Handmade blankets, stuffed animals' cards scrawled with shaky handwriting in languages Emily couldn't read, but felt all the same. David joked that their living room looked like a post office exploded. But when he lifted one small box and found it filled with tiny knitted hats from a retirement home in Ireland, his throat closed. He carried one upstairs, gently placing it beside Liam's crib. Emily watched him and thought, this is what it means to not be alone. On the night the fundraising campaign officially closed, Emily insisted on marking the moment. She lit a single candle on the kitchen table, dimming the lights. David, Liam, Ranger, and Scout gathered close. David raised a glass of water, too tired for champagne, too reverent for anything else. His voice was rough but steady. To Liam, to Ranger and Scout, and to every person out there who believed enough to give. You've given us something bigger than money. You've given us a future. Emily lifted Liam slightly, pressing her lips against his temple. We won't waste it, she whispered into the quiet. We'll fight for every inch, for every movement, for every tomorrow. Ranger let out a soft bark, Scout echoing with a higher yip as though sealing the promise. That night, after the house finally quieted, Emily sat alone in Liam's room. The moonlight spilled across his crib, catching the soft rise and fall of his chest. She traced a finger lightly over his tiny hand, remembering all the nights she had watched him sleep with nothing but despair in her heart. Now hope glowed where despair had once lived. Not certainty, not guarantee, but hope vast and alive. She closed her eyes and whispered, "The miracle is real, and it's just beginning." In the silence, Liam stirred. His hand twitched again, curling faintly around her finger. Emily smiled through her tears. The miracle was spreading not just through their house, not just through the city, but across the world. And now, with the weight of millions of hearts behind them, they would walk through the open door together. The clinic was nothing like the Parkers' warm, cluttered home. Its walls gleamed sterile white, humming with the steady rhythm of machines and monitors. Tubes coiled like vines around the beds, blinking lights pulsed like artificial stars. For Emily, walking into the rehabilitation ward for the first time felt like stepping into another universe, one where Liam's fragile body was no longer just her private responsibility, but the subject of science medicine and relentless observation. She clutched Liam tightly as they entered, her heart thudding against his small back. Ranger and Scout trotted at her side, their leashes held by David, who walked stiffly, jaws set. The nurses had looked skeptical when told that 2 puppies would accompany the patient, but Hayes's credentials had cleared the way. "They are not visitors," she had insisted. "They are part of the therapy." Now, as Liam was settled into his crib-like hospital bed, the dogs took up their stations naturally. Ranger stretched out beside the bedhead, resting on the mattress edge, his dark eyes fixed protectively on Liam. Scout jumped lightly onto the foot of the bed, curling near Liam's toe's tail, wagging in slow, steady rhythm. Emily exhaled, her grip loosening. They were here, all of them. The treatment began quietly. Electrodes dotted Liam's thin arms and legs, tracing every nerve impulse, however faint. Wires connected him to monitors that painted waves and spikes across glowing screens. A soft pump hissed as medication entered his veins, part of the trial's experimental regenerative formula. Emily's stomach twisted as she watched. Every beep, every hiss felt like a reminder of how small and fragile her son was. "Don't look at the machines," Hayes whispered beside her, laying a hand on her shoulder. "Look at him. He's stronger than they tell you." Emily nodded, forcing her eyes back to Liam's face. His lashes fluttered as he dozed, unaware of the storm of science raging around him. She reached down, brushing his tiny hand with her thumb. Ranger shifted, then leaning closer, nudging Liam's wrist with his nose. Scout answered with a soft whine, licking at Liam's foot where the blanket had slipped. Emily's breath caught. Even here, surrounded by machines, the dogs kept their rhythm, as if reminding everyone that their work had never been about wires and data, but about love. The first week passed without change. Liam lay still, monitors faithfully, recording faint impulses. The doctors noted data, Hayes scribbled observations, Emily and David prayed silently. Ranger and Scout never wavered. But by the end of the second week, despair began to creep in. Emily sat late one night in the hospital chair, staring at Liam's still body. Her voice cracked as she whispered to David, "What if nothing changes? What if it was all just luck at home?" David's hand tightened over hers. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His own fears pressed too heavy on his chest. Finally, he said softly, "Then we'll keep loving him the same. With or without miracles." Scout whimpered from the bed, pressing his warm muzzle into Emily's arm. Ranger thumped his tail, once solid and grounding. Emily let out a shaky breath, reaching to stroke them both. "Maybe they believe enough for all of us," she murmured. And then it happened. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary in every way. Nurses moved briskly through the ward, doctors shuffled papers, machines beeped their endless chorus. Emily sat beside the bed, stroking Liam's forehead, while Ranger kept watch at her feet. Scout, restless, had clambered closer, nudging Liam's arm insistently, licking at his hand, until the nurses chuckled softly at his persistence. Suddenly Liam stirred. His fingers curled not in random twitching, but with purpose, closing around Scout's fur. Emily's heart leapt, but before she could even cry out, something more astonishing unfolded. With a soft groan, Liam pushed against the mattress. Slowly, shakily, his tiny torso lifted. First an inch, then another. His head wobbled, his arms trembled, but he rose, sitting upright, unaided for the very first time in his 6 months of life. The room froze. A nurse gasped. Another dropped her clipboard. Emily's hands flew to her mouth as sobs burst out of her chest. "Oh my God, oh my God, he's sitting, David, look." David spun from his chair, eyes widening as if he had seen the sunrise for the first time. "Liam," his voice cracked. He's doing it," Scout barked joyfully, bouncing onto Liam's lap to lick his face in ecstatic celebration. Liam let out a faint giggle, unsteady but real. Ranger barked once loud and sharp, tail pounding against the floor like a drumbeat of triumph. The entire room erupted. Nurses clapping one, wiping tears from her eyes, even a doctor muttering, "Impossible," under his breath. Emily gathered Liam carefully into her arms, crying and laughing all at once. "You did it, baby. You did it." David wrapped them both in his arms, his own tears streaming freely. For the first time in months, they were not weeping from grief, but from joy. Hayes entered moments later, alerted by the commotion. She stopped in the doorway, stunned at the sight of Liam upright in Emily's arms. "What happened?" she asked sharply. He sat up. Emily whispered hoarsely, "On his own. With the dogs." He sat up. Hayes blinked, then crossed quickly to the bed. Her professional mask trembled as she bent over, observing Liam's posture, the residual tremors in his muscles. She swallowed hard. "This is unprecedented." Her gaze flicked to Ranger and Scout, who stood side by side now, tails wagging, eyes alight with what almost looked like pride. Hayes's voice softened. They gave him the strength to try. That night, word spread through the hospital like fire. Doctors who had dismissed the Parkers gathered to see the footage replayed. Nurses whispered about the miracle baby and his dogs. Strangers sent flowers to the ward. But for Emily and David, none of that mattered. What mattered was the moment, the weight of Liam's small body sitting upright. The sound of his laughter as Scout licked his cheek, the bark of joy from Ranger as if to announce victory to the heavens. It was their first real victory. Proof that their faith had not been in vain. proof that love, persistence, and two loyal pups had accomplished what machines and charts could not. In the quiet of the evening, after the bustle had faded, Emily sat by the window, holding Liam close. Ranger lay at her feet, Scout curled against her side. David stood nearby, staring at his son, with eyes still red from tears. Emily whispered into the night, her voice trembling with awe. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" David nodded, unable to speak. His hand rested gently on Liam's back, his other reaching down to stroke Ranger and Scout. The dogs shifted closer, their warmth steady and grounding, as though promising they would not stop until Liam's journey was complete. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, a new chapter had begun, one built not on despair, but on proof, progress, and a miracle shared by 4 paws and one small, stubborn boy. The morning of Liam's 2nd birthday dawned clear and bright, as though the universe itself had conspired to give him a perfect day. The snow that had blanketed their lives for so long was gone, replaced by spring sunshine spilling warmth across the park. Balloons swayed gently from the benches, colorful banners rippled in the breeze, and a crowd gathered around the open lawn. Emily could hardly believe it. When she had carried Liam into hospitals, into sleepless nights, into endless worry, she had never imagined this. Dozens of neighbors, families, and strangers, who had once only known them from screens, now stood together smiling, clapping, murmuring words of encouragement. Reporters held their cameras steady, but no one felt like a spectator today. They felt like participants in something much larger. David stood at her side, his hand resting protectively on her back as he scanned the crowd. His usual wariness was softened by awe. "Look at them," he whispered. "They actually came." Emily's throat tightened. "They believed," she said simply. Ranger and Scout bounded happily across the grass, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. Ranger moved with steady, purposeful strides, glancing often toward Liam as if checking on his charge. Scout was more excitable, tail wagging, furiously darting back and forth as though he couldn't contain his joy. They were no longer the small pups who had once curled at Liam's crib. They were still young, but time had given them strength, stature, and an undeniable air of guardianship. They had grown alongside Liam, and today, they would walk with him. Hayes approached, clipboard in hand, though her expression betrayed none of her usual clinical detachment. She smiled warmly at the Parkers, her eyes glistening. 2 years, she said softly. "Happy birthday, Liam. What a day to make history." Emily exhaled shakily, bending down to kiss her son's soft hair. "No matter what happens, he's already our miracle." The moment began quietly. Hayes signaled, and the crowd hushed. Emily and David lifted Liam gently onto the grass, steadying him as he found his footing. He wobbled, legs, trembling body swaying uncertainly. Electrodes and wires were absent today, no machines, no sterile monitors, just Liam's sunlight and the 2 dogs who had never left his side. Ranger took his place to the left, standing tall and calm. Scout bounded to the right, nudging Liam's arm with his nose, before steadying his tail, sweeping like a metronome of encouragement. Emily crouched a few feet away, her arms wide, her face wet with tears. "Come to me, sweetheart," she whispered. David crouched beside her, his voice thick. "We're right here, Liam. Just try." The world seemed to hold its breath. With a small grunt, Liam shifted his weight forward. His tiny shoe pressed into the grass. His knees quivered, but Ranger leaned subtly against his side, steady as a post. Scout yipped softly, licking Liam's hand in encouragement. "One step." The crowd gasped. Emily's sob cracked the silence. Liam paused, swaying precariously. Then he lifted his other foot, placing it clumsily ahead. His balance faltered, but Scout pressed his flank close, steadying him like a second pillar. 2 steps. The crowd erupted in cheers, though muffled quickly by reverence for the fragile, sacred scene. David buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. A third step. Emily cried openly, Al. Hands outstretched, whispering, "That's it, baby. Keep coming, you're walking." And then, against every prediction ever spoken, against the long shadow of diagnosis and despair, Liam walked. Stumbling, swaying, but walking, held steady, not by machines, but by the silent partnership of two dogs who had always known. At last, his small body gave out. He toppled forward into Emily's waiting arms. She caught him, clutching him fiercely, her sobs breaking into laughter. David folded around them both, holding his family like a shield. Liam pressed his cheek against his mother's shoulder, breathless but smiling faintly. In a voice soft as wind, he murmured, "Ranger and Scout helped me." Emily's heart shattered and reformed in the same instant. She kissed his hair again and again, whispering, "Yes, love." They always did. Behind them, Ranger barked once, deep, proud, commanding attention. Scout leapt in circles, then bounded to Liam's side, licking his face until he giggled. The crowd roared, clapping, shouting, weeping openly. It was not just a victory for the Parkers. It was a victory for every parent who had ever been told no, for every skeptic silenced by faith, for every community reminded of what love could build. Reporters tried to capture the scene, but no lens could fully hold it. Parents clutched their children tighter. Strangers hugged each other, voices broke with joy. Hayes stood silently apart, wiping her eyes, her scientific mind overwhelmed by the simple, undeniable truth of what she had witnessed. "This changes everything," she whispered to herself. Later, after the crowd had begun to disperse, Emily and David sat with Liam on a picnic blanket. Ranger lay stretched at one side. Scout curled at the other, forming a living cradle around their boy. The sun dipped low, painting the park in gold. Emily looked at her son, then at the dogs, then at David. "Do you realize what just happened?" she asked, her voice still trembling. David nodded slowly, his eyes wet. "Our son walked, and the world walked with him." She pressed her forehead against his, whispering, "We'll never forget today." Ranger thumped his tail in agreement. Scout gave a happy bark, chasing a butterfly across the grass before bounding back to nuzzle Liam's cheek. The image that remained captured in countless photos, etched in memory forever, was of Liam laughing as he toddled across the green field. Ranger steady at his left, Scout bounding joyfully at his right. The three moved together, boy and dogs, as though they had been created not separately, but as one story, one miracle. It became the picture that traveled the world, a child once condemned to stillness, now running free, flanked by the guardians who had refused to give up on him. For Emily and David, it was more than victory. It was proof that love and faith, multiplied by community, could bend even the most unyielding fate. For Ranger and Scout, it was the culmination of their instinct, their devotion, their quiet knowledge that they had a role to play larger than anyone had believed. And for Liam, it was the beginning. The first steps of a journey that would stretch into a lifetime, marked not by limits, but by possibility. As the sun set on his second birthday, Liam tumbled joyfully on the grass, Ranger at his left, Scout at his right, laughter spilling from him like music. His parents watched, holding hands, tears drying into smiles. The world might call it a miracle. Emily and David knew it was something even greater, love pure and unrelenting, embodied in the bond of a child and his two faithful dogs. The day Liam walked was not just the story of a family. It became the story of hope itself, carried across fields, across screens, across hearts. And in every corner of the world, people remembered that faith, love, and connection woven together could make the impossible real. And in the center of it all was a little boy, a laugh like sunlight, and two dogs who had always known the truth.